Hey friends, quick reminder that the Gaytheist Manifesto is made possible by the wonderful folks who support us at patreon.com/thegaytheist Manifesto. Shout out this week to Casey and Corey. This week, Casey and Corey's contributions will help us buy a vat of hungry, bloodthirsty piranhas to toss James Woods into. Thanks, friends. Oh, one more thing. The Inciting Incident 100th episode live show is this freaking weekend. Facebook.com/Inciting Incident Podcast to find out more, and you should totally be coming to hang out if you can make it. Now on to the show. Your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Gaytheist Manifesto. From Answer Media, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my fabulous co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
Hate mail, bring on the hate mail, send me your hate mail, I eat it all up.
Oh, God. I legitimately hope that's not the case. It's something that's fun to joke about, but I legitimately hope that's not the case. So this week's going to be a really interesting show, I think. We're going to be talking to and about a group of folks that get very often talked about, usually negatively, and I've yet to hear anyone actually talk to these folks. And to me, that seems like a thing that we need to fix. This week, we are going to be talking to a group of folks who identify as otherkin. These folks are often the punchlines and jokes that dismiss trans people, not to mention jokes that dismiss them directly. And it makes me really uncomfortable that a group of people who don't seem to be doing a damn bit of harm to anybody are treated and talked about this way. So I think it's time we met a few of these folks and let them speak for themselves. So Tony, Janet, Rin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
All right, folks. So we got to define our terms here. So what does it mean to be otherkin? I mean, I know sort of a little bit. I might be off the mark here, but from what I understand, otherkin is a person who identifies as something other than human, usually animals, but sometimes maybe things like fairies or aliens or maybe even robots or something. Is this correct? Am I totally off the mark here?
That's more or less, that's the nutshell. The term actually has a really interesting origin that I might get into right now, actually, because it's up. So the original internet kin communities were almost predominantly people who identified with Tolkien elves. And they called themselves elfkin, and they had this very grand, suitably pretentious spirituality system around it. And they, for the longest time, regarded anyone who identified as anything other than a Tolkien elf as some gross faker. Hence the term otherkin, which is people who are kin with things other than elves. Ironically, the term otherkin has outlasted those original elven communities by so long that there are now younger people identifying as elves who are being ostracized from the otherkin community because elves aren't real.
Oh, wow. We've got some infighting even for otherkin.
Oh, yeah.
Oddly familiar.
Oh, there's a lot of that.
I think another good term to be aware of is the term Therian. This is kind of a tangentially related term. The otherkin and Therian communities developed pretty separately originally, but you'll often sometimes see them used interchangeably. Otherkin originally kind of meant things that were in like the realm of fantasy, like dragons and elves and things, and Therian typically meant identifying more as like real life animals or extinct animals and things like that. But
otherkin, I've seen Therian mostly used for those who identify with like existent animals.
Yeah. So it's just a term to be aware of if you decide to take the delve into any of these spaces. But kin in general is just the more generally accepted term overall. So I just wanted to make that brought up.
Excellent addition.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what exactly, and maybe this is like a really broad question. It's like, asking a trans person, what does it mean to identify as a woman? Like, or as a man, or as neither, or somewhere in between, but I'm curious, I mean, what exactly is it like? Is it like you feel some sort of special connection to this animal, or, is it even analogous to being transgender in any way?
I think this would be a good time to go around our roundtable and have everyone like talk briefly about what they identify as and why, because that's a good way to answer in a less like, this is how everybody is, broad strokes, and be like, this is what it is for me, and give you a good snapshot.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
So I volunteer as tribute.
I was going to say, I think you just volunteered to start that. So
yes.
And everybody, please say your names when you introduce yourself as well, so everyone can know who's talking.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm Tony, and I identify most specifically as, it's okay to laugh when I say this because I don't take anything of myself seriously. I identify most specifically as two snow leopards piloting a people suit.
Okay, fair.
I love it. That's adorable.
That and my distant second kin type would be a golden retriever. And I identify specifically with and as snow leopards because I grew up in a very abusive situation that I had no idea was abusive. And one of my first social circles that was an adult social circle, not like it's school, you have to be here, you're forced in with these other weirdos, but like I have chosen as a grown-up to interact with these other people as grown-ups, and we are all engaging in something we enjoy together as a community, was the live action roleplay community. And the character that I threw together for my live action roleplay character was Mari, a snow leopard furry. And that was who I was when I interacted with people who didn't treat me like shit. And it was a very formative experience, obviously 17 going on 18, discovering that like I have value as a person. And having that inherently being tied to being addressed very seriously as a snow leopard for many hours of a weekend. And it's something that's always stuck with me because the more I researched the actual big cats, the more I found like things that felt meaningful as connections to me, because for the longest time, the Western science didn't believe that snow leopards existed. Obviously, the people who live near snow leopards are really damn sure that there's a ghost cat eating their goats and have known about them for quite some time, but we didn't really get photographic evidence and tangible evidence until my birth year. And so the more I learned about these animals, the more I felt like I was getting very meaningful information. And it's something that stuck with me for years and years and years. So now I identify as a snow leopard. And that's the short version. I said very verbosely.
Who wants to go next?
My husband gestured at me, so I guess that's me. I'm Janet. My kin type is dragon. It's a very broad category, but it's most specifically Western dragons. And oh god, okay, so Tony loves to tell the story.
Well, I think you should give your background with your abuse situation, which is
that's true.
Where a lot of this came from, and then I get to tell the funny story.
Okay. So I was in an abusive relationship for about 7 years with a woman who treated me terribly, absolutely dreadfully. She wanted to be the center of my universe, all that fun stuff. But she always wanted to be referred to as a princess. And so when I would do something bad or something she didn't like, something she wanted to be punished for, I would be referred to as a monster or a dragon who stole her. And so when I left that relationship, I decided, no, fuck that. fuck that. I'm going to take dragon and own that because it's powerful and stronger, and honestly, fuck that bitch. But the identifying as dragon came a lot later.
It actually, I was blessed enough to see the exact moment when the light bulb went off. Because early, and she's laughing already, it's great. Early in Janet and my relationship, the fact that I have this identity very strongly with and as Snow Leopard was actually something that was discussed quite a lot. Because I'm like, I know it's kind of silly sounding, but this is a serious thing about me. And Janet was like, I can see that it's serious, and I can see it means a lot to you, but I don't get it at all. And she also had some really intense preconceived notions about it just entirely being a bullshit concept. And so we had very lengthy discussions about it. And towards the end of it, when she was starting to get more to that, this is a cool thing about my husband, or future husband at the time. She asked me on our way home from a showing of How to Train Your Dragon 2, when I was being very enthusiastic about dragons, why I didn't identify as a dragon. And I sort of sat back and I went, and I started explaining some like personal relationships I have with shared concepts between snow leopards and dragons, particularly how I feel about heights. It's like I, as a snow leopard, feel about heights in this way that it's like it's safety and agency, and it's somewhere I can be up and away from things that are trying to hurt me, and also somewhere I can be up and observing things I may want to eat. And whereas dragons, from what I know from having conversation with people who identify as dragons, tend to view a position of advantageous height as like looking down on the peons. And like, as I said the word peons in the car, there was this dawning, oh, fuck, look on Janet's face. And about 3 days later, she was like, I think I am a dragon. And it was a really cathartic conversation after that. But it was so gratifying.
And Ren, what about you?
Oh, well, I'm Rin, obviously.
Right.
But I'd say, just as a note for my own personal identification, I'm kind of more on the end of the spectrum of being more kin adjacent than being super into kin for like some reasons we'll probably go into later. But I'd say my own identification, I'm autistic, and I've always felt a lot more comfortable around animals, that I can understand what's going in their head a lot easier than people and understand them. And I just think, ever since I was born, basically, I would look at animals and see a much stronger identification, those whatever circuits that are responsible for your own self-image and identity would fire a lot stronger than when I saw other people. Particularly, I would say my strongest association is with Komodo dragons, as well as more distantly with sharks and cobras. But I think it's just a function of my neurology that, for whatever reason, I don't. Sorry, I'm really nervous.
You're fine.
I just see myself more strongly in those creatures than I do in when I look at other people. And so I just think it's a personal, just a function of my brain. So,
yeah,
it's sort of like you see a picture of the thing you identify with, and it pings the seeing a picture of yourself response.
Yes, very much, very much. I can see almost ascribe thoughts and emotions in those pictures more strongly than I can when I see like a person laughing or smiling. Those expressions don't necessarily resonate with me as much as they do when I see, say, a picture of a Komodo dragon with its tongue out, which is very cute to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's like kind of the thing that I was thinking about when I was, when I was driving home from work and I was thinking about this conversation, and I was kind of thinking through my own preconceptions and trying to think about, what all of this actually means. And in my head, and you tell me if this is completely wrong-headed, but in my mind, it seems like it's one of those things where it's just like, if you're around other people and you think like, well, like the way that I experience and navigate the world is so different than any other person. Like, I'm not sure that I have enough in common with other humans to think that I'm one of them. Like, am I on track there? Is that way off base?
Me a little, but you were going to say something, right?
Oh, I was just going to say, it really depends on the person. And I think something that Tony and Janet and I have kind of danced around, we talked a little bit about it, is I think it's important to recognize that the kin community overall is a very, very spiritual one. People like us who recognize this as probably just being part of our neurology, I would say are in the minority, regardless of how we each individually think that the kin phenomenon actually manifests. And so I think for a lot of people,
at least those who think it's solely a neurology thing, who don't have.
Oh yeah, there are people who recognize both of those parts, but so I think for a lot of people, it is not just a recognition of I feel different than most people do. It is a recognition of I was in a previous life, or I have the soul of something different. So it's not just I don't necessarily identify with this, it's that I'm not that. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about. I think Tony, it was, who was saying using the terms identifying as and identifying with in sort of different ways. And the image of otherkin that I've always had, just from my very brief internet knowledge of what that's like, is mostly identifying as, like, considering yourself actually that animal or that creature or that what have you. But you've expressed, all three of you, I think, have expressed a little bit of just kind of seeing yourself through the lens of this animal. Like, for example, there are fictional characters who don't exist that I really relate with strongly, and I consider them almost part of my identity. So I can definitely see where you're going with that kind of thing. It's just the thing that is a lot more. The thing that's a lot more difficult for me to understand is the people who would say very strongly that they identify as this certain animal, like in the same way that I would say that I identify as non-binary, because that's just what I am. It's not that I'm seeing myself through this lens of being non-binary. It's just that's who I am.
That is a rainbow of points.
Yes.
That
take from it what you will and address whatever jumps out at you.
All of them I've kind of been rehearsing this conversation in my head since like 2 days ago.
Same here.
Oh, sorry. So first, something I want to put a pin in is the identifying with a fictional character thing. That is, I'm just going to put a pin in that and get back to it, because that is a type of otherkin identity that I want to discuss perhaps once we've established a bit more firmly what it is. I do use the terms identifying as and identifying with because a lot of people have a fluid relationship with whether it is as or whether it is with, and those are it's a language, it's a terminology thing. And to elaborate on that, it's like it goes into when one hears humanity being talked about and humanness specifically being addressed, at least for me, because like it's the reason I wanted to have three people here is it's a very subjective experience. I've rarely ever heard talk of what makes us human that wasn't used in a gross way. Like I've never heard it in a way, it's like pretty much the people who I've heard talk about humanness in a way that wasn't disgusting in some way are in the Skype call.
Fair.
Because it's like, you hear it in anti-ace sentiment, like sexual attraction is a part of being human.
Right.
And you hear it in whenever you're trying to talk about a unique neurodivergent experience. It's like, oh, everybody gets anxious sometimes, honey. It's just part of being human. And there's this point where, especially because there's so much overlap with otherkin community, with queer folk, with neurodivergent folk, with marginalized identity. There are people in the otherkin community who exist as members of marginalized spiritualities, like indigenous people with faiths that believe in spirit animals. There's so much of that experience that overlaps with existing structures of oppression. There's not really a anti-otherkin structure of oppression that exists in any conceivable form, but otherkin conversations tend to be a litmus test of sort of like the homework that asks you, did you understand the class? Like, if somebody's doing something that's harmlessly weird and you don't understand, is your answer to this to A, let them do their thing, or B, come harass them, kind of questions. And so a lot of what strictly identifying as something that's not human is doing is it's owning your own fucking experience. Like, you don't know what it's like to be me because you're not a snow leopard. It's a metaphor, yes, but it's also a way of taking back what a lot of people want to just take from you, and a lot of how the term human just gets used as this threat. Like, if you aren't behaving the way we want you to, your humanness is in question. Oh, what if I don't give a fuck about my humanness and in fact don't actually even want it in the first place? You know?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that sort of insight is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. Because, you know, again, like I said in the intro, like, the only time you ever hear about this concept is when people are making fun of it or using it as a straw man to dismiss trans identities, for example. Which is like, as you pointed out, there's a huge overlap there, you know, like, so yeah, I think that's a very important thing to kind of draw a circle around. I don't want to say I get it in terms of like I understand the experience, because I don't, because that's not my life experience, but like I can certainly like I 100% can see it if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally.
I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate the point that there are as many different views on what makes someone otherkin and what is considered otherkin as there are people who identify as such, because there are probably people within the community, I know there are because I've seen them, that would listen to this kind of conversation and say, oh, well, these people definitely aren't otherkin. There is definitely a big saying that you identify with something versus as something can be kind of a diversive thing. So I just think it's important to re-impress that our experiences don't necessarily represent
literally
not only just
every experience.
Yeah, like
Right.
not even, I would say, a majority of what makes of people who identify as otherkin. So
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out.
A very different view of the otherkin community in general than I have, which is useful for the conversation, but also fascinating.
Yeah,
because I've experienced the opposite personally.
Well, yeah, and I think that's awesome because, like, I always like to point out that we're having a conversation about the concept, not the conversation about the concept, if that makes sense. So it's like, you know, I mean, we could talk for days and not get the full story, and that's okay. It's just sort of a bit of a window in, if that makes sense.
oh yeah, definitely.
Oh, there was something. Was it Tony who said you wanted to put a pin in something and come back to it? I've already forgotten what it was.
The fictional character thing.
Yes, it is currently. I'm giving you a window into the kin community drama with this.
Yay.
The current subset of otherkin that are being most fiercely interrogated as to whether or not they should be allowed to exist. It is a very beautiful echo of things I see in literally every human community. Communities stack. Human nature stacks infinitely. And so there's always this like a discussion of, well, we're all mostly the same, but this one particular spec doesn't fit. So are we going to be assholes to them and ostracize them, or are we going to like meet up with some understanding? And you know what the answer to that is, like,
yes, we do.
And so the current, the du jour sort of is this fucking a thing is fiction kin folk, which is actually, Ari, you have expressed, in essence, you are a fiction kin person.
Yes, I am Edward Elric, bitches.
Yes.
Oh
I
my
identify
god.
as Edward Elric.
Welcome to the club.
That's amazing.
And it's a situation where one identifies not so much as like the concept of snow leopards, but this specific fictional character is me. And it is a lot easier for the layperson to understand because it's a very unique and surreal experience. It's very easy to put a letter on, but it's also very ephemeral and also very tied up in copyright law.
Right.
Because like I can
That was not how I expected that sentence to end, but like, yeah.
yeah, like I can watch, for example, to put myself out on here, I can watch an episode of Steven Universe, to be stereotypical, and see the story of the character Lapis Lazuli on screen and go, they are telling my own goddamn life story through this very thinly veiled allegory of the crystal gem bullshit. This is me. This is uncanny, vaguely uncomfortable, but every time I see her art come up, I'm just like, oh my god, it's me. And it's a thing. It's a variety of kin experience. Is that it? 'Cause in that I define kin experience as things that trigger the it's me kind of enthusiasm and that set of neurons even. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of how identifying with or as a fiction, and that's where a lot of the with or as is useful, because if you're identifying as somebody's property, intellectual property, that with or as can like avoid you an Anne Rice situation.
Oh god.
Explain that for some people who may not get the reference.
Anne Rice was a very, very lawsuit happy content creator who would attack her own fan communities for, like, legally sue her own fan communities for posting fan fiction.
Oh god. Yeah, Anne Rice is a bag of cats. I actually am part of the community that suffered a lot of these lawsuit problems.
Like, Anne Rice is why you see this fandom is not mine. Do not sue.
Ah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like there's a lingering fandom paranoia surrounding literally everything to do with copyright law because of Anne Rice.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of a place in which with and as is a useful distinction, because, like, if you go around on the internet saying, I am literally Lapis Lazuli, then there's, like, a 6-year-old who believes you in, like, you're a show-sponsored account. Suddenly there's a potential issue, and there's certain precautions one needs to set up around just to protect yourself, or when you have that sort of, I identify as this fictional character. But Janet and myself both have a short list of characters that we passionately identify with, and it can be kind of rotating as we grow as human beings too. Because at this point in my life, I definitely used to identify as the Lapis Lazuli character, and I watch that and it's like, that was my story to a point in my life. I'm in a different place now. I identify more as this character with this story. And so I personally feel it is a much less permanent, like lifelong kind of kin identity. And you can already see the reasons and the basic why these different communities may have this divergence of, like, your experience is different from mine, therefore your experience is not real.
Yeah, that's the thing that I see a lot when people talk about Star Trek. When I have, I see autistic friends talking about Data from Star Trek The Next Generation. And they're like, Star Trek The Next Generation made an autistic character without knowing about it. Like I've heard several people make that.
That is a common thing with autism.
Oh my god, yeah.
that is a, like, sideways toe step into autism advocacy, because, like, authors who are neurotypical will write characters that are based on people they know, and regardless of whether these people have been given the autism diagnosis, and regardless of whether the author wants to give their character the autism diagnosis, they're absolutely writing autistic people left and right. Oh yeah, Sherlock is autistic, Data is autistic, they're everywhere.
I like to
Just
say
like
that.
actual
Oh,
Nazis.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I like to say that allistic authors are great at writing autistic characters when they don't mean to,
Oh yeah,
Right.
and
try
very
to
terrible when they
fuck it
try. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Ari, ask your next question.
Oh man. My next question is, Callie, can you title this episode the one where Ari accidentally finds out that they're apparently some type of otherkin and they had no idea?
Yes.
Well, I do just think it's important to say that otherkin is a self-identification. So if you don't
Yeah.
necessarily click with that terminology, which I don't to a certain extent, it's not prescriptive.
Yeah,
So-
that's fair.
And
Just
that's
like
one of the
non-binary
ways-
people don't have to be trans if they don't think that's right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you asked earlier about the parallels between trans people and identifying as otherkin.
Thank you for
And that's-
bringing up the subject of Ari's next question.
Yes, thank you. I was just about to get to that.
Wonderful. Go ahead with your question.
No, I was just going to say go ahead
Do
because
you want me to intro it or do you want to just get into it?
I'm very curious as to what you wrote.
Okay. So, like, me being a trans person and all, sometimes I make, this is self-calling out time, I make jokes about, like, identifying as an attack helicopter or being a cat gender, that kind of thing. Because that's something that cis people use against trans people all the time, is kind of lump trans people in with otherkin to show that, like, these things are inherently ridiculous. This isn't a thing that exists.
There's joy in my soul.
But I am wondering about the parallels that might exist between being otherkin and being trans. So do you experience any kind of, like, body dysphoria? Like you're an animal who's in a human's body? Like, you might make modifications or dress up in certain ways to make you feel more euphoric about whatever your kin is. Is that a thing that happens?
I am so happy in this moment that I get to share so many wonderful pieces of information.
Yes.
Okay,
Tell me the
so
information.
first
Oh my
of all, something that I really want to, like, bring to the forefront of this conversation as something to remember is that the person who decided to start making fun of trans people for identifying as an attack helicopter had no idea that there are actual people who identify as a specific model of attack helicopter.
It's hilarious.
It's a real thing. They're usually autistic people with a special interest in that particular type of vehicle will have a specific vehicle that is, like, their favorite vehicle. And within that, there is a subset of people who identify as the vehicle. It's a thing. Plane furries exist, and nested further down into plane furries are plane identifying beings.
plane
Like, it is
furries, like, as, like, airplanes.
an airplane.
Right.
An airplane.
Anthropomorphic. They're called aeromorphs. I suggest being careful with that search term. But they are basically anthropomorphized planes. You know how, like, the front of the space shuttle almost kind of looks like a face? Like, if you looked at it, you're like, oh, I can see that kind of looking.
To the furry level.
Yeah.
There's actually some airlines somewhere that didn't realize what they were using for one of their mascot pictures.
That
Was an
used
aeromorph.
I saw that. Or like the Shamu plane. I think the Shamu plane is a great
Yeah.
example of almost an aeromorph IRL. So
But
I'm just
so-
going to go ahead and admit that I went ahead and Googled that while you were talking, and I don't regret it. This is fine.
the design on them is really, really cool.
Yeah, like I'm actually looking
great
at someone in an
breakdown,
airplane
like, how
furry
to
suit,
fur-
and it's really freaking cool, to be
I
honest.
probably know exactly who that person is, but yeah.
But so that's something that, like, because we're talking about the way otherkin is used to dismiss trans people, the people who do not give a shit about trans people are absolutely not going to be swayed by a couple of neurodivergent furries going, no, I literally am a fucking snow leopard.
Right.
That's not part of the equation, and to do so very frequently and to suggest so, it puts the blame of oppression on oppressed trans people very firmly.
Oh yeah.
It's like, I can't attack the cis, but I sure as hell can punch down safely, kind of.
Mhm. And I would say that there's even a section of the trans community that uses otherkin, or rather blames otherkin for their oppression as well.
Oh, that 100% exists. I recently cut someone out of my life who does that actively.
Oh, yeah. And the
the
baffling thing about that is that these people seem to treat, someone who's never heard or never interacted with trans people as being a blank slate, as though transphobia doesn't already exist in our society. And it's like, they could have been
somehow poison them.
Yeah.
Making them think we're stupid.
They would have been your best ally. They would have marched with you at Pride. They would have gone to your hormone therapy appointments with you.
Paid for your genital surgery.
But they saw someone who said, "I'm a cat, lol," on the internet, and now they hate trans people. It's just not. People who
That's not how that
are
works.
people who are transphobic are because our society is. They're not because they saw someone on the internet and were like, "Oh, they're silly. They must not be real. Therefore, trans people don't deserve equality and respect."
Right.
So.
Like if one excuse didn't exist, they would very much find another. Like it's
exactly. Yeah.
And that does lead into, like, there are a lot of non-binary folk who identify as otherkin who use their otherkin experience to define their gender, because to them, the experience of being a boy or being a girl is fucking alien, and they have no idea what does and doesn't connect to that. But the identity of being this animal that they identify with on a kin level is completely a thing.
Well, and I think that ties back to what you were saying earlier about all of the messages that we get about what it means to be human, right? Like if you don't identify as a boy or a girl, that must mean that you're not actually human. And I could very easily see that being internalized.
Who hear that and their answer is like relief and enthusiastic.
Okay.
Like, you mean I'm completely free from these expectations that are all inherently a bullshit and oppressive anyway? Cool. Where do I sign up to identify as an attack helicopter?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Tony and I, in our private messages, kind of have experienced this, but a lot of people use otherkin as a way to cope, whether with their gender dysphoria or things like that, because if you say, "I'm a shark," sharks don't have the same gender expectations
Sharks have no
as
concept
humans.
of gender.
Yeah, they don't.
Right.
You don't look. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I
You
was
don't
just
look-
agreeing.
You keep trying to talk at the same time accidentally. You don't see a picture of a shark and you're like, well, I don't know if that's a boy shark or a girl shark because it doesn't have eyelashes or long hair or hairy legs.
It's not wearing lipstick.
Yeah, you look at a picture of a shark and it's like, this is allowed to exist outside of our own gender roles, and I think that can be a really freeing experience. So
Yeah,
Makes
I can
so much
totally see
goddamn
that.
sense.
Specifically why I included a cisgender. Janet is cisgender and she is otherkin, and that's why I wanted to include this. So it's like, it's not a non-binary thing.
Mhm.
But you asked about dysphoria.
Yes, I'm very curious to hear about this.
And that is why I wanted to lay the ground conversation about it's not transness, because I'm about to basically turn around and go, but here's some eerie ways in which it shares similarities. I do experience, and I feel very vulnerable saying this, and you can tell because I'm probably going to crack a lot of jokes, and humor is how I cope with fear. I do experience a certain amount of dysphoria that is not gender related. And for me, it has a lot to do with how I specifically interact with emotion and emoting and telegraphing how I'm feeling. I grew up watching Disney cartoons instead of watching live action stuff. Like, I would avoid Sesame Street because I can't read faces. I have no idea what the hell face shapes are trying to communicate to me. However, I can tell you what a cartoon animal's trying to communicate to me because ears and tail telegraph information in a very understandable way to me with how my neurology works. So in my mind map of myself, I do have those emotive features and those tools that I can use to express my feelings. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on, I do not want to think about a world where furriness was an axis of oppression. I I do not have these body parts, and sometimes it is a very confusing experience to me. Part of how I cope with my physical disability and part of how I joke about it, but also a very real part of how I interact with the physical world is I don't have a tail to balance me. I have very shit balance, and I have historically had better balance in a fursuit with a tail, because that provides an anchoring to the ground and a directional information that I don't usually have. And it also provides it to my spine, which has historically not been very responsive to any attempts for me to control it. So, in a couple of tangible ways, I kind of have something vaguely resembling species dysphoria. I also have like directions that my arm hair grows in that you can't touch me and brush me in another direction. Has to do with my autism, but it's easiest and most comfortable for me to describe as you're petting my fur the wrong way. Please do not.
There is not a single bit of that sounds unreasonable to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, and I guess it's the fact that these conversations just don't fucking happen. And I mean, that's why we're doing this, I guess. But, I don't know. Like, it bothers me even more now that like it's all like
you also have
dismissed
to know that
so
I've
easily.
put a lot of thought into how to justify my weirdness, because a lot of my existence as a person trying to interact with other very intolerant people has been, how do I justify this? And I think Janet's about to share her experience, but I don't think she has like the level of, here are my justifications trademark. She just has more like, this is my experience.
Yeah.
And that's
thank
okay
you.
too.
Actually, my husband's really right about that. Like, so I'm a cis woman. I mean, I do experience some dysmorphia, but that's a whole other bag of cats. But I do also occasionally experience a species dysphoria.
Which there needs to be a better term for, because I feel dysphoria is appropriative of my own trans experiences.
Right?
That
But
term's
I
definitely
also
been
don't know how to... I don't know how to separate it personally from my gender experience. So I don't know where the line is. So I don't know a better word. That aside, we're probably going to use species dysphoria, as inappropriate as it is, for lack of a better term.
Well, and I think in the
yeah.
previous explanation of your experience, I think you did a very good job of articulating what that means. So I think anyone
Or
listening,
the
I think will get where we're going with that. I think.
Like, there are, as a dragon, there are times where I do have wings, and it's uncomfortable to sit here and go, okay, so how do I lay? Oh, they're not actually there. I'll just lay on my back. Or like, there's a very specific way in which I like to have my hair pet, because there's a frill there. And if you go the wrong way, it's
it fucks
immediately
it up.
uncomfortable.
And like, you don't even have to be touching Janet's head. I can wave my hand in the wrong way over the top of Janet's head, and it cues the same, like, God, don't fucking do that reaction. We also have they make pillows out of it, but we have a bag made out of it. It's sequins. It's sequins that can be laid
The
either
mermaid
direction.
pillow.
The mermaid pillow.
Yeah.
I love those.
Oh,
And
yeah. I'm a big fan.
One side of it is the color Janet identifies as having her scales, and the other side is black. And if I fuck it up and don't have it like all laying the right side up and everything in order, it genuinely distresses Janet to the point where I can look her in the eye and just like run a single finger the wrong direction of the and she's just like, she's so uncomfortable, and she's like, I can't leave it there. And it has almost OCD qualities, but it's tied in with this for Janet, from what she explains to me, this very personal, like, no, that feels weird on my body to see that.
Yeah, well, and I think tying it back to everything that you all have described about the experience and why why you feel that way. Like, I think if you had just said that completely out of context, I might be thinking like, that sounds kind of silly, let's be honest. But like, put in the context of everything that you've explained, like, it makes sense to me.
See, and I actually have a story about that, to go back to before my days of identifying as dragon and understanding otherkin as an experience and as part of who I am, I did get a moment of sort of out of context.
From the other side of it, like, what the fuck?
Yeah, from the out of context, what the fuck kind of space of I was at a convention, an anime convention when I was younger, walking around with a group of friends. I walk behind this guy. I am like 2.5 feet behind him. And he yelps like I have hurt him, turns on me, and is just like, how dare you? Just flips his lid at me about how I just stepped on his tail. And I'm just sitting here like 13, 14 years old, looking at this adult, I'm pretty sure, flipping his shit about me, about stepping on something I couldn't see and getting mad at me about it. And like, I personally am a creature comprised of vengeance, another dragon trait. And like, it did nothing but piss me off. And so like, from that point forward, I was just like, otherkin are rude and weird and fuck this shit. And that's sort of what Tony was combating against when it came to telling me about their experience and helping me understand and be more tolerant and not an asshole.
Because like, it's like assholes exist in all experiences, and also you just never know what someone's been through earlier in the day, that it's just like, I can handle XYZ awful thing, but like this 13-year-old girl stepping on my tail was just my breaking point. Or even just like, you could just be an asshole. But like, that doesn't one being an asshole doesn't inherently invalidate the experience.
It's almost as if the community is as diverse as any other. Weird. Weird.
They all
So
happen
weirded
to
out
share
right
this
now.
one similar but not the same experience.
Blasphemy.
Yeah. Going off what Janet said, I actually had a pretty similar experience. Not that specific experience, but how I thought of otherkin before, which is it's actually been how I've discovered parts of my own identity pretty much every time, which was, the only exposure to the otherkin community I had was through the furry community. And the furry community is generally pretty accepting of it, but everyone else was super, super critical of the otherkin community. And because I only had people outside of that space talking negatively about it, I thought it was really weird and almost bad when I had no reason to think about that. And it wasn't really until I kind of reconnected with Tony and Janet and everyone that I started realizing, oh, this actually fits my experience pretty well. And there's no reason for me to hate these people just because all I've ever heard is people talking shit about them. I actually had this same exact experience with the furry community, which was I had someone I was dating who really didn't like them, and I thought they were terrible for a long time, and now I'm probably one of the furriest people in existence.
Yeah.
So
I would
can
live
attest.
in a fursuit if I lived far enough north.
Oh yeah.
We can always move no further north.
Don't me. Move me to Alaska, I will become a snow leopard.
We'll move to Minnesota.
You are putting ideas in their head. Well, before we wrap up here, because we are coming up on time, I want to make sure that are there any sort of like big bullet points about this that we haven't addressed? I mean, I feel like we've gotten pretty deep, and of course it is important to point out that this again is a conversation about the topic, not the conversation about the topic. Just like it's impossible to have the conversation about any single community of folks or anything like that, but I don't want to have a 300-hour podcast, but I do want to make sure that we hit, the super important bullet points. Is there anything else that we've missed that we haven't covered yet?
Tell us the things we need to know. Do it.
No pressure.
Nope.
I have something if no one else has any other things they want to bring up.
By all means.
Okay, so one thing that I actually was thinking about in the preceding days, because I have to practice all my conversations because I'm nervous, was another thing that you'll often see levied against the otherkin community is that it's just mental illness. And so you don't have to take it seriously. It's not real. It's all in your head. Yeah, ableism, exactly. And I think, well, obviously the people who make these claims aren't here to have a real conversation about neurology and coping mechanisms, because that's definitely something that you'll see in the otherkin community, whether people really want to address it or not, is that these can be related to mental conditions. I mean, there's a lot in otherkin that you can see, like image problems with body image, with dissociation, with wanting to be a different person because you're not satisfied with the person that you are and the way that you think. And these are really great conversations that need to happen. But it's important to remember that when people are just calling this a mental illness, they're not here to talk about that. They're just here to rely on everyone's ableism. Yeah, they're here to just say, you know, it doesn't matter. These people are just crazy. Don't take them seriously. You don't need to worry about them. So,
yeah, I hear that. I mean, it's like any other conversation where mental illness gets brought in. It's not trying to illuminate the experience. It's trying to dismiss the experience. And
exactly.
And of course, my response to that is like, okay, I mean, if it is related to mental illness, okay.
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
And
definitely.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, and you're. I think that's a great call out.
I mean, I definitely alluded to that earlier. I do use a little bit of my identifying as dragon as a way to combat my PTSD.
PTSD?
Yes, thank you. From my abusive relationship. Like, it was taking something that was used against me that would send me into depressive spells that would really tear me apart, and also bring back memories of things I went through, and looking at it and going, no, that's me. But like, I'm stronger than all this other stuff because that's me. I don't know. That makes sense to me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it makes sense too. Sense too. And I think honestly, what it really comes down to, Tony, you actually said it, I think it was toward the beginning of the conversation, like, even after all of this conversation, which I think has been a fantastic conversation, even after all of this, if you're a person who thinks like, yeah, this is still weird and I don't get it, why do you care? Like, that's what it comes down to for me. Like, even if you think it is the most ridiculous thing in the world, there is no harm being done here. And there is no reason to treat people badly or disrespect people. I don't know. I'm not a person who's usually at a loss for words, but you know, I just keep thinking like, and again, it's because people don't want to take the time to learn. They hear this and they think like, wow, this is so ridiculous, and these people are just like way out there.
A snap decision is way easier than nuance.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why a lot of people resort to saying that otherkin is bad to trans people, or it's bad to, or it's that it's just a mental illness, because they already have this preconceived notion and they just want to justify it by being like, oh yeah, I don't get it. That must mean it's bad. Let me see how I can make it bad to other people. So,
yeah. Well, and my take on the whole thing originally was like, yeah, it seems kind of weird. I don't understand it. But like, I've also never talked to anyone that I knew was part of that community. So like, how can I really know? And I am very glad to have you folks in my life to sort of broaden that experience for me. Something that I don't get on the level of, it's not my experience, but I feel like I understand it a lot better and can be a bit more of an ally when people have those conversations. So that's something that's super valuable to me. So all three of you, Tony, Janet, Ren, thank you so much for taking the time, for explaining and for being vulnerable, and for enlightening us all with your experience. I very, very much appreciate it.
Listening to my probably ridiculous questions, and if you take these
Very
questions and make them about
questions.
trans people, I'd probably be pissed.
I mean, if you have more questions, always feel free to ask. Like,
You can ask the dumb questions with me. I'm just delighted to be asked.
Yeah.
honestly, that's probably the most respectful I've seen these questions ever been asked. So don't worry about that at all.
Yay!
Good.
and
Well,
especially like,
I do
go
have
ahead.
one thing I do want to touch on before we go, because I feel like I would be remiss not to mention otherkin identities and neo-pronouns.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Because we did briefly brush on people who use otherkin identities as a way to explain gender, who are non-binary, who have no association with a human gender. And How do I human gender am cat? And something I did want to brush on a bit more was the pocket I exist in where those things do collide, where I considered briefly neopronouns. And of course, anyone who's brushed near, who knows what a neopronoun is, knows they're for otherkin, cat isn't a gender, that's awful, this whole conversation. And I think it's a lot of what contributes, even among the non-binary community, to like loathing of the concept of otherkin, is because we're this really elaborate scapegoat for other people's grossness.
Yeah.
Because like we're over here being harmlessly weird and describing our experiences in a weird way. And it's like, and something I don't think a lot of people realize is that the singular binary genders that exist in eternity have descriptions that are about as logical as some otherkin non-binary people's gender identity. Like, what the hell is it about a cat that's feminine and a dog that's masculine?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, those are great questions.
Like, cis people have personas built in, cat and dog. You know?
Yeah. Yes. That is a great call out.
Oh I want to say it's rude and feel called out because like a distant secondary kin type for me is cat.
Oh.
And I'm just like,
Janet, it's okay. You can come out. We already all knew.
Right. This is a safe place for you. If you need someone to talk to, we're here. It's okay.
I love you guys.
That's the thing I wanted to touch on in the whole how it devalues transness or whatever conversation, is that it actually, ignoring otherkin identities, removes a lot of nuance from a lot of non-binary identities. And I think I have seen it negatively impact NB people who are like, I would like to use these pronouns because this reason. Unfortunately, it's not respectable. So I have to use these more standard pronouns because I want people to respect me in the trans community. And it puts a lot of weight on a lot of vulnerable people to behave in such a way that doesn't create transphobia.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. Again, huge thanks to Tony, Janet, and Ren for coming on and sharing their experiences with us. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And I bet Ari's got a thing.
What is social media? The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines social media as noun, forms of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content. There is a lot of talk about social media these days. Is social media bad or good? In this essay, I will show that social media and other types of communication on the internet are good for our society. First, social media is a good way to talk to your friends, and you can even meet new people on there that you wouldn't meet in your day-to-day life. On Facebook, you can friend people like Ari Stillman and learn new things about gender, mental health, memes, and funny things. I think it is always a good thing to meet new people. Next, sometimes social media isn't the best way to talk, but there is always email. Email is like a letter, but typed on the computer instead of written on paper. It's free, and you don't need to buy a stamp or take it to the post office. You can write letters to addresses like aristillman4@gmail.com if you have questions or comments about stuff. That is very convenient. Finally, there are also new forms of media out there on the internet, like podcasts. Podcasts are like radio, but you can listen to them anytime. There are many famous podcasts, like Serial, Radio Lab, The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand, Antique Collectors Gone Zany, and Ari's exclusive patron-only psychology show, which you can get at patreon.com/Ari Stillman. However, not all podcasts are good. You have to be careful when choosing a podcast to listen to. Some of them are not as good as the others, like the SJW Circle Jerk, so be careful. In this essay, I have shown that social media is a good way to keep in touch with friends and learn new things. It is good to talk to other people and expand your mind, so I think social media is good. There are some bad parts too, but overall, it is good.
Ari, you never fail to deliver. If you want to support the show,
Plus.
you can go to patreon.com/thegatheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation to support the show. And if that's not doable, you can always head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That helps us move up in the rankings and get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.